So here's part two. Let's take a deeper dive into talking about this. And so, what happens if a student is in that survival brain? We have no idea what students are coming to in that imaginary backpack. We have no idea what they went through the night before. We have no idea what happened the weekend. They're coming in hot on a Monday. We have no idea what happened even this morning when they came in. And so if a kid is coming in hot and you can just see it, you know that they're in their survival or their emotional. And I'm going to tell you right now, they are not going to be ready to any kind of learning. They're not even going to be ready for making those connections with you this morning. Because the brain wants one of two things. The brain is either wired for protection or the brain is wired to make connection. And if the brain is down in the survival state, it's for protection. And they are not going to, feel the love in the emotional state. They're not going to be able to move on up to the executive state, the prefrontal cortex. They're not going to be able to move up in there if they are coming in hot. That's just not the way that the brain works. And so if they're not in the survival state and they're in the emotional, and I'll talk about what those look like too, then we can start making those connections and we build those relationships. And then that's what helps put and keep kiddos in that executive state. So what do these look like? So survival state, and I'm going to go deeper a little bit later in my session here. But what the survival state looks like is it can look like two different things. Fight and flight, and I call that as one thing. And then the second thing is what we call or frequently think of as freeze. And so I'm going to use the word collapse instead. So it can be hiding. It can be the hoodie up. It can be just being withdrawn and, just putting your head down on your desk. And yeah, a lot of times we think of that as, okay, so they're just tired. Well, let's go back to skill and will. So why? What has happened that you are so tired? Yeah, maybe it's just as simple as didn't get enough sleep last night. Okay, well, why? Let's keep digging a little bit deeper. And I know you're saying to me, Shell, how do we do this? I've got 25 kids, 25 different sets of eyes looking at me first thing in the morning. How do I do this? Well, we do it slowly and we continue to do it over time is what we do. This doesn't happen the next day or the next hour. This happens over time. And so it can literally, in that survival state, it can look like the fight. It can look like the running away. It can look like, the more physically aggressive types of things. So I want to make sure that there's two different types, that fight or flight, and then also that collapse is the survival brain. And so the only way to get up to the prefrontal cortex, if you're in the survival brain, is you have to go through the brain. The brain develops from the bottom up and the inside out. And so then I'm thinking about, I tell my kiddos, to take their hands and put them over your head above your ears. That's your limbic system. And so this is the emotional, and can look like back talking, being sassy. It's more of a verbal reaction instead of a physical reaction. And so you hear that, you hear kids talking back, and you hear adults coming right back at them because we're in those places too. And as soon as we can get better at calming our brain and body state and making sure that we're regulated and we have the tools to do that, we're going to be able to model, and hopefully kids will be able to mirror what we're doing, and we can help them get out of that state. But all they're looking for, I already said, the brain is wired for two things, protection or connection. And so if their amygdala says, okay, I am safe, I'm not needing to hide, I'm not needing to fight, I'm not needing to collapse, then what the brain starts to do is it wants to make a connection. And what happens is our kiddos are going to show us connections in the most unloving ways, in the most ugliest ways, until they start building those relationships and making those connections that we are modeling to them, and then they will start to mirror. And once again, this takes time. This isn't something that just happens overnight, because you have to think about all that time that a student has not had the connection. So I want you to think about this. For every year of not having a connection. So I'm going to think about our fourth graders right now. They were first grade babies when COVID hit. And we think about connections were lost when they were in first grade because of COVID. Connections were lost because in second grade we were hybrid. And then they came into third grade hot, just like they came into fourth grade hot. And it was because the brain was not able to get the connections that it needed during those 2 years of COVID. For every year of not having the connection, it takes 3 months to rebuild those connections. So 3 months for first grade, 3 months for second grade, because they did not have full years. We're at 6 months. And then they came in hot to third grade. That's another 3 months. I'm not saying that the teachers did not build the connections that they needed, but our brains are wired for the personal, the face-to-face, even the physical, a handshake, a touch of the shoulder, a hug. And our kids were missing out on that. So if we think about first grade, second grade, third grade, that's 9 months that we have to try to undo what happened because of the lack of connection. So they came into fourth grade that way. Not all of them, but I'm going to say a lot of them, a majority of them came in, or maybe not a majority, more than what we're used to, came in missing those connections for 3 years. And so now that's what we have staring at us. And we have to move them from survival, emotional, into their executive state, into their prefrontal cortex, into that thinking brain. And that thinking brain, the message is, what can I learn? I am here, teacher. I am so excited to be here. I cannot wait for what you have to show me today so that I can learn. And what that looks like is a kid that is telling you things. They look like they're ready to learn, and they are giving you this and that. They can problem solve. They can work with a partner. They aren't being sassy. They aren't hiding. They aren't fighting whatever it is that we're trying to teach. They are there and ready to learn. So now think about your students yesterday. Think about your students last week. How many of them were in that prefrontal cortex? And it was because they felt the safety, and it was because they had the connections, and they were there to work with students, with you, by themselves. And we did not have 9 months of first grade, second grade, and third grade. And now almost a whole year of fourth grade now. So if I added that, we're talking 12 months of work that we need to do with kids. Not for kids, not to kids, but with kids. So this is why that phrase, behavior management, has to do with the adults, is because of this. We now know what has happened. And I'm going to say it again, first grade, second grade, third grade, and now again, fourth grade. and we did not have the tools to handle what was happening with our kids. That's just plain and simple right there. Nobody's fault. We didn't have the tools. We don't have the resources. But now we are knowing what's happening, and now we're starting to know better. So now we start to do better. So now that we can get into those places, here is that deeper dive of where our kids are coming to us, and how they're coming in too. And there's that top again. I said the survival really, instead of thinking it as a 3 parts, think of it as 2 parts. The above and the below. That's the fight and the fight and the flight. And then the second one is the freeze and the fawn. And this really gets into the science. It's going to get into the sympathetic nervous system. It's going to get into the dorsal vaga. And so we're talking about that nervous system and that direct line between the brain and your whole entire body. That's your vagus nerve. And that is connected. So if I am feeling a certain way, I'm going to show it in my body in how I react. And that maybe could even be like upset stomach. Now, I realize we don't have brains in our organs, but actually we do. Each of our organs has this little brain that sends all those messages to our brain. And so they are talking. And that's that highway. That is that fast track from your vagus nerve anywhere that's in your body, whether you're feeling it in your stomach, whether you feel it in your fingers, whether you feel it in your toes. Some people feel it in their ears. It is sending that direct message to our brain, something's not right, and I'm reacting to it. And so then we go down to that freeze and that fawn, and that's that collapse. And the thing that gets me about these two at the bottom, that collapse part, a lot of times those are the kiddos we don't notice. Oh, so-and-so's laying down on the desk. Okay, they're tired. And we think of them as tired and not withdrawn. But it could be something else going on. And what it takes is connection and building the relationships with our kids to be able to get to that point. They have this disassociation. And that's where that withdrawn, that's where the depression can come in if this goes unnoticed. And so it's really important, I believe, that we have got to understand that collapse are those ones that a lot of times we bypass. That because the kid's not fighting, they're not yelling at you, they're not being aggressive towards you, they're not yelling things, they're not physically doing things, they're not clearing out a room because they're flipping tables. And so I really worry about the responses from trauma where it is that collapse. So what we're getting ready to do is we are going to, the people that are here live, we are going to sit in what's called a fishbowl circle. And so we have about 50 people in this room that are doing this with me, and I'm doing this presentation. And what's happening is we're going to take about 8 people, and we're going to sit in an inside circle. And we're going to leave 2 chairs open so that if somebody from the outside of the fishbowl wants to come and step into the circle and add their voice, so that they can be heard, they want to share, because we want everybody to feel like this is a safe place and that what you're hearing, you can ask questions about or you can add your voice to the conversation. So we have some circle guidelines, and we want to make sure that in the circle that we speak from the heart. So you don't have to worry about, I got to hang on to what I want to say. Listen and speak from the heart. And so then you're going to also listen from the heart. You don't have to worry about, oh, that makes me think of this and I want to say this. You don't have to sit here and think about, oh, I got to remember this. When it's your turn to speak, just trust that you'll know what to say. And that leads me right into the next one. Based on maybe what you're hearing, what